briefly one of the panelists on a live stream yesterday. I was only on there for about maybe 30 to 45 minutes. A black female YouTuber by the name of Nicole Michelle. She goes by the name on YouTube, Inner Beauty TV with Nicole Michelle, something like that. And you won't be able to see the live stream because I think she made it a Patreon exclusive. But on this Saturday morning, one of the things I wanted to highlight was my main contribution to their panel discussion. They talked about a wide range of things before I got on the live stream and after I left the live stream. But while I was on the live stream, the one question, straightforward question that was posed to me was, Alan, which gender do you think is more shallow and superficial when it comes to selecting a romantic companion? Which gender do you think is more shallow and superficial when it comes to their selection of a spouse or a long-term romantic companion? And my response was, in general, I think members of both genders are shallow and superficial when it comes to their criteria and their selection process for either a future spouse or a long-term romantic companion. I think members of both genders are. That's my general answer. I don't think there's too many men and women in society that are 0% shallow and 0% superficial. I don't. Rare exceptions aside, I don't think there's too many men or too many women that are 0% shallow and 0% superficial when it comes to their selection of a spouse or a long-term romantic companion. Now, if I had a gun in my hand and I had to lean towards one gender or the other, I would, and I said this on her live stream, I would lean towards women. I think women are, generally speaking, more, at least slightly, if not sometimes significantly more. I think women are more shallow and superficial as a group than men are as a group. Now, when it comes to choosing a short-term, non-monogamous casual sex partner, that's where I would say both men and women, I think they're almost equally shallow and superficial. I couldn't lean towards men. I couldn't lean towards women. I think when it comes to choosing a short-term, non-monogamous casual sex partner, I would arguably say that both men and women are equally shallow and superficial. But when it comes to choosing a spouse, someone to be married to, or someone to be in a long-term romantic relationship with, again, I think generally both men and women are both shallow and superficial to some degree. But if I had to lean towards one gender, I think women are. Here's why. I think men, the number one area, here's the three areas of being shallow and superficial that most men and women have. I would narrow it down to three general areas where I would say that men and women are shallow and superficial. First of all, what does it mean to be shallow and superficial? We might hear those terms a lot, but what does it really mean to be shallow and or superficial? What does it mean to be shallow and or superficial? When you are shallow or superficial, what that means is that you are willing to spend time with someone and date someone for reasons that have very little, if anything, to do with how you genuinely feel about them as a person. You are willing to spend time with the person and even date that person for reasons that have very little, if anything, to do with how you genuinely feel about them as an overall human being. That's what it means to be shallow and superficial. You are enamored and impressed with things like outward appearances. And secondly, I would say the number one time you're shallow and superficial is when your interest in a person can change like this. If one characteristic was to change, say in less than 48 hours, you would be willing to stop spending time with that person. Or if you're in a relationship with them, you'd be willing to break up with them just over that one thing. Here are the three main areas that I would say that men and women tend to be shallow and superficial. Number one, looks and sex appeal. Looks and sex appeal. That's the number one area where I would say both men and women tend to be shallow and superficial, is as it relates to looks and sex appeal. Looks and sex appeal. I would say men probably more so as a group than women in that area, but women are not too far behind. Women are not too far behind. Like a lot of men, there's some men in society who have this mistaken belief that women don't care about a man's looks. That's bullshit. If you believe that, then nowadays I don't think too many men are naive and foolish enough to believe that. But trust me, looks are always going to be important to a woman to some degree. Combination of your looks and your sex appeal are always going to be important to women. Particularly, I always have said, particularly when it comes to short-term, non-monogamous casual sex. Definitely. When it comes to short-term, non-monogamous casual sex, looks and sex appeal are just as important to women as they are to men. Believe that. Believe that. When it comes to casual sex, like one-night stands, weekend flings, and other variations of short-term, non-monogamous casual sex, women put just as much emphasis on a man's looks and sex appeal as men do on women. Now, when it comes to marriage and long-term relationships, I would say men generally put more emphasis on that than women do. When it comes to marriage and long-term relationships, men put more emphasis on that than women do. But yeah, that's the number one area that somebody can be evaluated for being shallow superficial, is when it comes to how much emphasis do you put on a member of the opposite sex's physical appearance, level of physical attractiveness, and their overall sex appeal. Sex appeal. Quick side note on that. Sometimes a person can be good looking but lack sex appeal, and vice versa. That's true on both male and female end. Like, I've met women in my life who I looked at as being beautiful, but they weren't really sexy. Then there's other women who were like average looking in terms of beauty, but they were extremely sexy. And I've heard women say the same thing about men. Like, there's some men that women will say, God, he's handsome, but he ain't really sexy to me. Then there's other guys who are average looking, but women will say, oh, he's sexy. I gave this example once before. I'll give it again. I give you a celebrity, somebody who used to be famous back in the day when I was younger, was Bobby Brown. Used to be a New Edition. Bobby Brown used to be a New Edition. A lot of women used to say that about Bobby Brown. If I could think of more than any other celebrity I could think of was Bobby Brown. I know a lot of women who used to make the comment, Bobby Brown is not really handsome to me, but he's sexy. I can't tell you how many women said that about Bobby Brown. A lot of women I knew personally used to say that about Bobby Brown. They say, honestly, I don't really find Bobby Brown to be handsome. I actually, in some respects, think he's less than average looking, but he's very sexy. His demeanor, his disposition is very sexy. So that just shows that being good looking is not always synonymous with being sexy. Sometimes they are. You could be both. You could be both good looking and sexy. But other times you could be one or the other. You could be good looking but not really sexy, or you could be sexy but not really good looking. But that's the number one area where I would say that most men and women are shallow and superficial, is when it comes to their physical appearance / level of physical attractiveness and their overall sense of sex appeal. Second most area where I would say a lot of men and women tend to be guilty of being shallow and superficial is when it comes to that man and woman's level of fame, popularity, social status in the community, or similar to social status in the community, the caliber of family you come from. Like you come from a family that has a name to it, a name in the community. That's the second area. That has a lot to do with socioeconomic stratification, socioeconomic class. So that's the second biggest area I would say that a lot of people tend to be shallow and superficial, is when it comes to stuff to do with your level of fame, popularity, social status in the community, or if not your individual social status, the social status of the family, like your parents basically. The social status level of your parents. That's a secondary area where I would say men and women, I would probably, between the two, I would probably lean towards saying women are more superficial and shallow in that area than most men are. But men, I've known men to be shallow and superficial in that area too. So men aren't immune to being shallow and superficial in that area. But I think generally speaking, women tend to be more, like a woman sometimes will gravitate towards a man simply because he's very famous or he's very popular at their high school or very popular on their college campus. Or he's the son of a well-known doctor or a well-known lawyer or a well-known businessman or a son of a distinguished college professor. Women will gravitate to men for things like that, more so, generally speaking, than men will with women. And the third and final area of shallowness and superficiality would be things related to that man's level of career success, his level of wealth or financial success, and along with that, his net worth, and the extent and accumulation of his expensive and impressive material possessions. Again, his level of career success, his level of financial success, wealth, and or net worth, the extent of his expensive and impressive material possessions. And if I had one more thing in this category, would be his level of academic achievement, his level of education. His level of education or academic achievements and accomplishments. That's the third area where I would say both men and women are shallow and superficial. Again, also in this category, I would lean towards saying I think women, when it comes to selecting a future spouse or a long-term romantic companion, women are more shallow and superficial in this area than the average man is. Women are more superficial, shallow and superficial as a group in this area than men are. I would say out of those three areas, category number one is when men, I would say men are generally more shallow and superficial when it comes to the selection of a spouse or a long-term romantic companion. Is when it comes to the area category of looks, physical attractiveness, overall sex appeal. Men, I give them the edge in being more shallow and superficial. Category number two, I would lean towards saying women are more superficial when it comes to things to do with popularity, fame, notoriety, social status in the community, or the social status of your parents or step parents. I would say women are more shallow and superficial in that area when it comes to selection of a spouse or long-term romantic companion. And the third and final category, career success, academic achievement, level of education, financial success, wealth, net worth, the amount of expensive and impressive materialistic possessions you own, I would also get an edge towards women. Most men, I said this on Nicole's live stream, not too many men are going to hook up with a woman that they don't find physically attractive or sexually appealing simply because she's highly educated or wealthy. Men just don't roll like that. There's exceptions, of course. There's always rare exceptions. But generally speaking, On a scale from 1 to 10 that men like to evaluate women on, and men do with women too, women do with men too. But most men, if their preference is to hook up with a woman that's a 7, 8, 9, or 10, but they get introduced to a woman that's a 3, and that woman who's a 3 is highly educated and wealthy, 95 to 99% chance that's not going to change that man's attitude towards wanting to date that woman. If she's a 3 or a 4, he's still not going to be interested in dating her. Now, as I said on the show, if a woman's, let's say your preference is to date a 7, 8, 9, or 10, but you meet a woman that's a 6 or even a 5.5. Yeah, the fact that she is highly educated, is making $300,000 a year, and is going to be generous with her money with you, that might sway your opinion. That might sway your opinion. But if a woman's like a 2, a 3, or a 4, that ain't going to sway your opinion. On the flip side, that will for a woman. That will for a woman. In most cases. Not all, but most cases, that will for a woman. If a woman thinks a man, let's say a woman's preference is to date a man who in terms of physical attractiveness and or sex appeal is a 7, 8, 9, or 10, but she gets introduced to a man that's a 3 or a 4. If that guy who's a 3 or 4 is broke and has nothing really to offer in way of finances or material possessions, that guy ain't got a chance with that woman. But if he's wealthy, making $1 million a year and got a house on the beach in Malibu and he got a Ferrari and a Rolls Royce, that guy could be a 2, 3, or 4. That woman will force herself to pretend like she's interested in that guy to exploit him for his money and material possessions. Believe that shit. That's literally why you have women who are gold diggers. Women, they know they can pretend for days, weeks, months, years, even sometimes decades that they're attracted to a guy solely for the purpose of exploiting that man for his financial generosity and his net worth and his material possessions. So yeah, when it comes to selection criteria for a spouse, a future spouse, or a long-term romantic companion, I would argue that women as a group, generally speaking, are more superficial than men are as a group, generally speaking. But in the specific category of looks, physical attractiveness, sex appeal, I will say men are more superficial than women. They're more superficial than women. And in my Patreon exclusive portion, I'm going to discuss how the issue of being shallow and superficial and being honest about it relates to my whole Mode 1 philosophy. Because one of the things I said on Nicole Michelle's live stream is this. A man being shallow or superficial or a woman being shallow or superficial is not really a major problem. That's not really the major problem. The major problem is the fact that most men and women don't have the balls to be real, authentic, and upfront and straightforward with members of the opposite sex about the fact that they are shallow and superficial to one degree or another. That's the problem, is that most shallow and superficial people try to pretend like they're not. And that's what I'm going to discuss in the Patreon exclusive portion.